I made my AWS Lambda functions run 67% faster just by moving some code around. Now there are two things you need to understand to make this happen: cold start and warm code blocks. Let's start by navigating to the Lambda service, then click on Create Function and give it a name. Choose Python from the Runtime dropdown, hit Create, then head to the Configuration tab. Click on Function URL in the left menu, then click on Create URL. Choose None for authentication type, hit Save, then confirm that you see a function URL in the Overview section. Next, select General Configuration in the left menu, then click on Edit. Here, I'm going to change the function timeout to 30 seconds, hit Save, then navigate to the Code tab. Scroll down to the code source section. Here, I'm going to copy-paste pre-written Python code that starts by importing the time and the random module. Anything above the Lambda Handler function is part of the cold start block that gets kicked off when the Lambda gets executed for the first time. On line 5, I'm simulating calling the RDS service to initiate a database connection, or calling the secrets manager to grab my secrets, or calling an external API. On line 6, I'm assuming calling these services takes 2 seconds. Then on line 7, I'm printing that we are at the end of the cold start block. Inside my Lambda Handler method, which represents the warm code block, I'm calling the random function on line 11 and saving it to the random_number variable. On line 12, I'm printing my random number, and on line 13, I'm assuming that my core function logic takes 1 second to run. Finally, on line 14, I'm printing that we are at the end of our warm code block, and on line 15, I'm returning our random number. Hit deploy to save your changes, then click on the function URL to execute your Lambda function for the very first time. I'm going to hit refresh to execute my Lambda function one more time, then navigate back to the Monitor tab. Click on View CloudWatch Logs, then go inside the latest log stream. Here, you can see when we first executed our Lambda function, it started by executing our cold start block. After the cold start block execution was complete, it went into our Lambda handler or the warm code block and printed the random number. Now let's look at the execution report for our first run. It took 1003 milliseconds to execute the warm code block and 2120 milliseconds to execute the cold start block. Next, let's analyze our second Lambda run. Since the underlying Lambda container was already up, this time the execution of the cold start block was skipped. Here, we can see that the execution went directly into the warm code block or the Lambda handler, then our random number was printed. If you look at the execution report of the second run, you'll notice that this time it took 1004 milliseconds to execute the warm code block. And since the cold start block was skipped, I'm going to add 0 under the init column. This means that my second Lambda execution saved 2 seconds. In conclusion, by moving my initialization code above the Lambda handler or in the cold start block, I was able to make my Lambda functions run 67% faster in the subsequent runs. There you have it. But before you go, here's the catch. The more code you add to the cold start block, the longer the first execution will take.